Hi, welcome to Weekend Review, where we look at some of the news and the headlines. I'm Phil O'Connor, the Live Enterprise Director, joined again this week by a stellar cast. I've got Justin Wingirter from the Watchdog team, Josh Delaney from the Enterprise Desk, our fine sports editor, Ryan Sharp, and from the business desk, filling in for Dominique, we got Adam Wilmoth. Thanks for joining us, guys. A lot of news this week. Justin, let's start with the EPA Administrator, who's long been the target of critics, finally falls, resigns the office this week. Tell us what we know about that story.
Yeah, I mean, it was a day I think we expected probably for a couple months, frankly, and it came yesterday. Scott Pruitt announced his resignation from the EPA. He officially left today, and a deputy will take over today.
Now, everybody sort of knows the litany of, or if they don't, there's a long litany of issues that have kind of plagued his administration at the head of the EPA there. My question is sort of, what does he come back to? What is his future in Oklahoma? What do people say, you know, where does Scott Pruitt go after this?
I don't think we've seen the last of Scott Pruitt in the political arena. I think he comes back here and runs for office.
I mean, this is, how do you deal with that baggage? I mean, I understand that we're in a strong Republican state and that there's a lot of, you know, even on his way out, he's still essentially blaming the media, critics, environmental groups for his downfall, but you know, as a lot of other people mentioned, a lot of it seems to sort of be self-inflicted in terms of some of the controversies, including even his own staff members.
I think he comes back and says, I carried the ball as far as I could on deregulation, something Oklahomans generally agree on, and then the liberal press or the Democrats or environmentalists got to the point where I just couldn't take it anymore, and so I left and I just handed that on to the nuts guy.
And then the one last thing, you know, maybe the image that will most stick with Scott Pruitt as he leaves office is the confrontation that occurred this past week. He became the latest administration official to be essentially accosted by somebody in public.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what was on that video and what happened there.
Yeah, there was a young woman and her children felt like she, on behalf of her son, had to make a stand, and she was more interested in the policy issues. I mean, what she perceives to be as damage to the environment under Pruitt. So, yeah, I mean, just the latest, as you point out, of Trump officials being accosted in public and people trying to make their stand when they see him out at a restaurant.
Okay, well, you've heard it from Justin. This is not the last we've apparently heard of Scott Pruitt in Oklahoma. We'll keep an eye on that story. Josh, you've got a story coming out this weekend about sort of, I think it might be a good problem to have. I'm not sure how we define this or whatever, but it's one that we are seeing sort of crop up in several of the entertainment districts that are sort of starting to develop and flourish in Oklahoma City. Talk a little bit about the story and what you're finding from what the neighbors are saying about that.
Yeah, we're looking specifically at Northwest 23rd, the Uptown Historic District. It's a happening place where all the hip cats go. It's got a variety of bars, a variety of restaurants and entertainment establishments. Folks go up to Tower Theater to enjoy some live bands. It's a great spot. It's a happening spot, but previously it was a little worn down. So as the new development has come in and people are excited about it, some of the surrounding neighbors are looking at the traffic. They're hearing the noise come from the area. And so there's a bit of a debate about how much is too much. You know, what's the balance here? I talked to one guy who is spending a lot of money soundproofing his bedroom and his house because he is tired of the racket up on Northwest 23rd. So it's an interesting little balancing act that they're doing up there. And as you said, it's happening all over the city. You know, people seem to want to have these walkable neighborhoods, places they can go to and grab a drink. As we know, people go from one side of town to the other to go visit, you know, another neighborhood. And so
we're talking here about the Plaza District, Paseo District, 23rd Street, Midtown, areas that are bumped up against residential areas. And these are places that, you know, a decade ago were ghost towns, were, you know, abandoned areas, and you're seeing, and you talk to some of the business association folks there, and they they want to be good neighbors, and they understand this issue. There does seem to be conversation going on, which is always a good thing or whatever, but
yeah, there is, and what they pointed out to me was that in a lot of these neighborhoods, when we go to a local watering hole, quite often these places are owned by people who do live in those neighborhoods themselves. And so they don't want to get a bad reputation. It's not good for business. Everybody wants to have fun and enjoy themselves. In fact, I talked to a relative newcomer to Oklahoma City, and it was something that they enjoy about the city. It's something that they expect. They want these kinds of places to be available to them. You know, they don't want to live in a city where the carpet is rolled up or the sidewalks are rolled up at 9 o'clock at night. And then also some, well, I spoke to one member of the council who has been through this same issue in other parts of the city, and in fact the plaza is a part of her district. And she talks as well about how to just keep a balance, that you want to be a good neighbor and understand that oftentimes the back patio of your bar is up against somebody's backyard. So interesting stuff.
It's a great story. Affects a lot of people. Something you can see this weekend in our paper. Speaking of another place that's sort of undergone a revival, the Homeland grocery store at 18th and Classen. A lot of people will be excited to hear about this. What's the latest on that story?
That's right, and it's related. That with all the development going on downtown, you've got new housing, and one of the problems has been as people move in, they want a grocery store nearby, and the grocery stores don't want to build if there's not enough people. So it's kind of been a chicken and egg problem, and now we're starting to see. Steve Blackmeyer's got a good story Sunday looking at that issue, and the new Homeland that's opening up is the first new entry in this area. It's a Homeland that's been there for a while, but it's just undergone a $3 million 6-month renovation, and now it's much more modern, much more designed for the community that's built up around it now. And it's kind of an issue that 10 years ago, when development was starting in that area and they were wanting to get some grocery stores, there were about 4,000 people living downtown. Now it's up to about 8,500, so it's more than doubled. So there's more of enough people to use a grocery store that's moving in. Steve looks at some of the challenges, some of the desires for additional grocery stores, and kind of the need for just kind of as more people move in, as more housing opens up, then there's more opportunities. But this is a good start, a good opportunity for people who are already living downtown to have a nearby grocery option.
Absolutely, and this has been an issue for a long time. The Native Roots was open for a while, and there was hope that would sort of become a downtown, but it never sort of developed the way I think a lot of people hoped. There's been discussion of Walmart's opening, neighborhood markets in the downtown area. Really, this facility is about the closest neighborhood for anybody who lives north of the river until you get to, unless you want to go far west or far east, and of course, there's a lot of neighborhood, it's been a place that's just sort of underserved. And then there was discussion about the Gold Dome being at one point converted into a grocery store. And it wasn't too long after that the discussions at Homeland, where neighborhood residents for a long time have been saying, please do something about the Homeland at 18th Street. Well, finally, when somebody started talking about doing a grocery store about a block away at the Gold Dome, or 2 blocks away, 3 blocks away, all of a sudden there was a lot of movement on but it looks great. I've been in there. It's not quite finished, but it's a big upgrade from what it was, and I think that place is going to do a land office business. Land office business. Apparently, the Thunder have opened the checkbook like nobody has ever opened the checkbook before.
That's true. It's been a big week for the Thunder. So this time last week, we were kind of unsure where Paul George stood, where a lot of pieces for the Thunder were going to fall. So last Saturday night, the party of the year apparently takes place. Russell Westbrook hosts a party up by Lake Arcadia. And it's essentially a celebration of Paul George agreeing to a new deal. Now, we didn't know that beforehand. We kind of heard that might be what was going on. But a couple hundred people, Nas, popular hip-hop artist, Russell Westbrook, Paul George, and 250 or so of Oklahoma City and Edmond's finest together celebrating Paul George's new deal, which came out to, we found out that night, was a 4-year deal for about $137 million. The last year that deal is a player option, so which means after that 3rd year he has the option to come back or to become a restricted free agent. So that was kind of the first domino to fall for the Thunder. After that, the Thunder picked up actually they re-signed Jeremy Grant to a deal, a little more pocketbook friendly. It's still $27 million over 3 years. The next deal was Nerlens Noel, a free agent from the Dallas Mavericks, who a couple years ago was really popular. Actually turned down a $17 million per year deal from the Mavs. The Thunder got him on the cheap. They're only going to pay him $1.75 million this year.
Some issues there.
Yeah, it's a prove yourself year for him. He didn't play quite as much this year as he did the year before with the Mavs, but still another big guy that gives the Thunder a legit second string big man behind Steven Adams. So then you have Raymond Felton re-ups with the Thunder for 1 more year. So all of that together, plus the contracts that the Thunder already has on the books with Westbrook and Adams, which are very large contracts, all comes up to the Thunder being the NBA's first team that's going to push over $300 million in terms of salary and luxury cap tax. It's about 150 and 150. It's a lot of money.
And then Golden State goes out and gets DeMarcus Cousins.
Yeah, on the cheap for $5 million.
It does not have the highest payroll.
No.
But we can already hand them the trophy, right?
Yeah, pretty much. The Thunder now has the highest payroll when all things considered in the league. Golden State's next. I believe Houston's probably next at third. Now, what remains to be seen is if they get too far into the season with that number. They don't have to actually pay that tax bill until after the trade deadline, which is much later in the season. And they have some options. You can use a stretch provision, and this again, we talked last week about needing all kinds of calculus and advanced statistics degrees to understand all this stuff. But they could use a stretch provision on 2 players, Carmelo Anthony and Kyle Singler. What that does is it allows you to stretch the price of that contract over a few years. For Carmelo Anthony, it's over 3 years. So instead of paying him $27-something million this year, you stretch it over $9 million over 3 years, and it reduces the tax. So right now their current tax bill is at $150 million. If they stretch Carmelo Anthony over those years, it reduces their tax to just $50 million. So it's a $100 million difference if they stretch his contract. If you stretch him and Kyle Singler, it goes from $150 million down to $35 million. So just by those 2 moves, you can save yourself a boatload of money.
What's the downside of it? Why wouldn't you do that?
So it's still on your books, and it's on your books for longer. So like Carmelo Anthony, he's just got 1 year left on his deal, and it's $27 million. But if you stretch that over 3 years, all of a sudden you're on the hook for $9 million over the next 3 years, and it's a tax hit. So 2 years down the road, they're not any. I mean, they're in a little bit better shape luxury tax-wise, but they're still in the hole, and so you're still have $9 million on your books from Carmelo Anthony, who may not have played for you for 3 years, but you're still paying tax money on him.
Gotcha.
It also, the optics of it is a little weird. When you look at a guy like Carmelo Anthony, you're essentially waiving his contract and saying, move on down the road and we're going to pay you anyway. So it's a little strange that way too, but and they may choose not to do it because of the long-term effects on their deal. With Kyle Singler, that would be over 5 years instead of just the 1.
Well, they might as well do it because nobody's going to be playing for the NBA title for a while except the Golden State Warriors.
Man, it sure doesn't look like it. Now you've got 5 guys that were on the All-Star team last year on 1 team.
And didn't it, I think I also read something like, isn't like 14 of the 16 NBA All-Stars all in the West now?
Yeah, it's
the league
the West
is sort of tilted
is extremely West heavy now because you've got LeBron James with the Lakers now, the 5 All-Stars with Golden State. It's been this way for a couple of years. You've always had LeBron James in the East, but now that he's moved over to the Western Conference, all of a sudden you've got a very, very Western Conference heavy league.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, people will go back and say, look, I remember the Lakers, Sixers, and Celtics. Those were the only 3 teams in the league for a long time. But I don't know. I just think when you know that the season, when competitive balance is so skewed that there's no, I don't know.
Yeah, and you're going to have the same teams pop up next year in the playoffs that you had this year. I mean, so Chris Paul re-ups with Houston, so you get him back healthy. That looks like a little bit of a different team than what lost to Golden State in the conference finals. Of course, Golden State's not going anywhere. They're going to be around. And then on the East, it'll be a little bit different. Of course, Cleveland's going to fall off the map, you'd have to assume, without LeBron. But then you've got Boston. Philly's going to be really good still. So it should be fairly similar on the East, and then the West will be extremely top-heavy. And
then you mentioned that we'll be looking into a little bit more on this party, right?
Yeah, we've got plans to do some kind of first-person accounts of that party from people that were there, so it should be fun. I'm going to venture a guess to say that none of us were invited.
None of us. Okay, all right. I just want to make sure. Not there.
I can't speak about that.
Okay, I get that as well. Okay. Well, listen, that's the kind of news we give you every day, 24/7, 365. Check us out online, pick us up at the newsstand or in your driveway. We'll deliver it if you'd like. We'll see you next week.